I want to preface this by saying I didn't get very far watching the show, so I don't actually know who Queen Chrysalis is necessarily. Like, I think I ended up watching this with one of my friends, like the finale, where I guess she was trying to steal somebody else's man or something. I don't know. What I do know is she is such a good main character that I ended up giving up my roots entirely with the purple yellow, two of my favorite characters from the show of what I know, to play a white-pink deck based around her. Now, to me, white-pink just seemed a lot better than white-purple or white-yellow did, and I'll explain. White-purple would have been nice, it's what I was originally going for, except pink now has specific cards that are good at sniping specific characters, so since I'm building the deck around taking my opponent's characters and then clearing their field, pink does that better. It's not going to be white-yellow because white-yellow is more rushy. It's more of a control the field kind of thing through power, and I wanted just a straight control deck that controlled what my opponent had in play. I also want to say that the deck isn't necessarily done. I don't normally put these deck profiles up unless I've done a little bit of testing, but in this case I haven't had a chance to do any testing, and this is sort of a prototype version of the deck that I'm going to be messing around with until I can figure out what works, what doesn't work, and start tweaking some stuff. So let's get that deck list up there. As always, if you're just here to net deck the deck list, and here it is, please enjoy. All I ask is that you leave me a like on your way out. As for the rest of us, let's take a closer look. So the main star is going to be this main character card, Queen Chrysalis. I am in love with this card. On its start side, you can pay 3 action points to take control of an opposing friend. And until that friend leaves play, that friend is just yours. It's not until the end of the turn or the end of a specific phase. No, you just take that card and you can put it in play somewhere on your side of the field. Its boosted side doesn't actually have an effect, which makes it a little bit useless, I understand, and I don't think anybody's going to be taking this card to a huge tournament because of that. It doesn't have an actual boosted side effect that constantly changes the game like a lot of other mains do, but its start effect is so amazing it doesn't even matter to me. I've always had sort of this sick love for taking control of my opponent's characters. I just think that feeling is like the best, where they play something that's really good and you just take it from them and you play with it instead. So now we can finally build a deck around that sick love, and it's what I'm going to do. To go along with our theme, we're running an event and a resource that both take our opponent's friends. As a card, Risky Business fascinates me, and it's something that I haven't seen in very many other card games, so I'm in love with it. Yes, I know, I'm in love with a lot of things, I'm very fickle. Risky Business has a lot of text, so I'll simplify it for you. You look through your opponent's deck, you take one card out of the deck, and you set it to the side and put your hand over it, and then you ask your opponent which card you took, and your opponent has to name the friend. If your opponent named the friend that you took, then they get to put it in play on their side of the field for free. If your opponent was unable to guess the card that you took, then you get to put that friend on your side of the field for free. This leads itself to a lot of mind games. Your opponent is going to automatically assume, wait a second, he's probably going to take my best friend. But if your friend knows that you're thinking that, then they're going to be like, wait a second, they wouldn't just take the best friend because they know that, so I need to name something else. Or if they just want to go completely off the rails, they could say, oh, well maybe this is a trick, and they want to take something small, so maybe I should just name something there. Most decks run between 8 and 10 different kinds of friends, so that's like a 1 in 8 to 10 chance that your opponent's actually going to guess it right. It's so good. You can mess with your opponent's head so much. If there's a card in your opponent's deck that you just know will help you out and your opponent knows it too, you could take that card, making your opponent think that, oh, well, that's too obvious, he wouldn't actually go after that. Or you can take something else, and it's so good. It's just something that I want to do to my opponents. Pony Charm is a lot simpler. Your opponent plays something you like, you play this on it, and all of a sudden you control it. All in all, the deck is capable of taking a max of 7 friends from my opponent, which is pretty much an entire field. I could pretty much just play with my opponent's friends if I could pull all of these cards off. I want to bring this up early because I know somebody is going to bring it up if I don't. I realized that there are also cards that take friends until the end of specific phases. And there was an alpha build of this deck where it revolved around using these cards and then playing cards like Lily, Panicked Pony, or Penny Lanes, or something that made you sacrifice one of your own friends for an effect, and you do that in conjunction with taking your opponent's friends so that you just sacrifice them off. I eventually moved on from this when I realized it was easier just to take out their opponent's friends rather than go through the hassle of taking control of them and then playing something that dismissed them. Thematically, it is very fun to play strategies like this, but it's also just a lot less efficient for something that I plan on using competitively. Getting on to dismissal friends, we are going to start with Cheese Sandwich. Cheese Sandwich is incredibly situational, probably the worst of the dismissal friends that I have, which is why we're only running him at 2. But he is dismissal that is very powerful. He gets rid of a 3 or higher friend. Most dismissal is 2 or lower. And he's also the only dismissal friend that pays for himself in power. I'm going to test Cheese Sandwich out, but I'm also considering taking him out for Big Top. My only thing with Big Top is the deck isn't very good at initiating face-offs. If I find that the deck is getting into a lot of face-offs that I am favorable in, then I'll probably start throwing some Big Tops in instead of Cheese Sandwich because it's a lot better removal. Pinky Responsibility Pie is getting replaced by Tom, and that is tough. I'm still running Pinky Responsibility Pie in this deck, but it's kind of on thin ice. Like, originally it wasn't even in the deck. It was out for things like Penny Lane so that I could take control of friends and then dismiss them. But once I got rid of that strategy, I put Pinkie Pie back in to fill up the space. I still think it's a very powerful card. It's 2 power, so if you consider that you're paying 2 for 2 power and then 2 to dismiss one of your opponent's friends, if that opponent's friend that you got rid of was worth at least 2 action points, then this card pays for itself. It's just a good card. It was highly crushed by its competitor, though, Tom the Rolling Rock, which does the exact same thing. It's got 1 less power, but costs 1 less action point, so it makes up for itself because, it's -1 in both areas. It has a chaos effect where if you flip it during a face-off, you can get rid of a 2 or less power friend involved in the face-off, and when you play it, you can actually dismiss a friend anywhere on the field. It doesn't just have to be on the problem that you play it to. Really, the only downside to this card is the fact that it's got 4 pink color requirement, and that is something that can be easily fixed. For event removal, we have Cutie Pox Outbreak, which I'm not crazy about. I don't think is that great of a card, but we need another form of removal, and I like this a little more than downright dangerous. For one, you could snipe a friend with power 2 or less, which lets you get rid of a lot of problematic things. It lets you get rid of Rarity Truly Outrageous, obviously. Lets you get rid of Ultime Organizers, Cloud Chasers. It lets you get rid of Bright Bulbs. It definitely has its uses. Plus, it has the bonus effect where if you flip it up for a chaos effect, you can dismiss a friend with 3 or more, and that is where it really shines. Catch Me is another really kind of iffy removal card that I really like. If you are in a face-off with something like a Tom or a Pinky Responsibility Pie or just something that you don't really care about, you can sacrifice it to get rid of one of your opponent's friends, and that's just awesome. Keep in mind, it doesn't say problem face-off anywhere on the card, so it could even be a regular face-off like the Showdown from Poetry Slam, which we're going to talk about next. One last thing I want to say about Catch Me is if it really comes down to it, you can sacrifice one of the friends you took from your opponent to get rid of one of their cards. You're essentially getting rid of 2 of your opponent's cards, but it does kind of suck having to give up one of the cards you worked to steal. So Poetry Slam is a surprisingly good showdown card because it's a white card that actually kind of gets rid of a friend like what pink is supposed to do, but for some reason doesn't. One of the reasons I feel comfortable running it is we're also running the color fixer that gives +2 power, so you can use that to power up a friend for Poetry Slam. And if you pick a favorable matchup, it's pretty much just like free dismissal. You just get rid of a friend. I'm running Glamour Gleam because she has an effect that could be good. You get to look at the top card of your opponent's deck, and if the printed power of that card is 3 or less, you can banish it. Even if you don't get to banish it, getting to look at the top card of your opponent's deck is kind of helpful because it lets you know whether or not you can initiate into face-offs, and she only loses 1 power for her cost, 3 for 2 power, which I don't think is that bad. Yes, the deck is running Rarity Truly Outrageous. Y'all know it is, okay? Until they figure out that this card needs to be banned, I'm going to run it. In a control deck like this, it's extra deadly because your opponent will never actually get the chance to start solving problems. When they eventually do start solving problems, you should have enough of an advantage on them and enough control to protect Rarity and just let her win you the game. Truly Outrageous is going for like $60 to $80 right now, so to fill the space, I'm going to put in Rarity Sudden Inspiration, who is a 1-for-1, not necessarily awful, not necessarily great, but her Chaos effect just happens to be really good. When this card is flipped, you banish a friend involved in the face-off. No sneaky little gimmicks, no power requirements, it's just banish one friend that you don't like, and then you banish this card, which doesn't matter. People who watch my older videos will remember that Octavia Virtuoso was my favorite card from the base set. 5 for 4 power was really good at the time, and I really like this card because your opponent has to pay +2 to move a character to or from this card's problem. There's so many different ways that you can manipulate that, it's unreal. Admittedly, this card's a lot better in purple decks because you can use the movement to make your opponent keep having to pay the extra to move to Octavia or from Octavia, but I still like it, which is why it's at 1 here. I'm going to see if I can make it work. Another situational card that's in kind of the same boat is Princess Cadance. It's 4 for 4 power, that's good, it pays for itself in power, and Troublemakers can't be uncovered here. So if your opponent plays a face-down Troublemaker, you can put this on that problem, and that Troublemaker just can't uncover itself. I'm off and on with these two cards. I think eventually what's going to happen is I'm going to find out that one card is just much better than the other, and I'm going to take out the other one and just put in 2 of whichever card survives. It's either going to be Princess Cadance because I'm running into a lot of Troublemaker decks and I want to keep them face down as long as possible and give them something else they have to deal with, or I'm going to find out that my opponents aren't really playing Troublemakers and it's going to be Octavia so that I can get that toll booth effect. We'll just see what happens. Brown Betty, 3 power is nice, and it helps fill color requirements. I actually struggled with this card a lot because I wanted it in so badly, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to fit it in. Eventually, I found a way to get it in. We're running 2 Lyra Heartstrings. First of all, 5 for 4 power isn't necessarily that bad, especially when it has such a good effect. Its effect is when your opponent draws a card, you can exhaust this to draw 2 cards. People like to pretend that this isn't that good because if you exhaust this card, then it can't like evolve itself in like face-offs and stuff, but that's actually one of the reasons that this card is amazing. If you go and you solve a problem using this card, and at the beginning of your opponent's turn, you know your opponent's probably going to have something to initiate a face-off there, you can let your opponent draw the 1 card for their turn, exhaust this as soon as your opponent does to draw the extra 2, and all of a sudden you're not solving that problem anymore. So if your opponent solves it, you can just ignore it. You can let them have the point, move it over to your turn, and then during your turn you can manipulate it so that you can win the face-off better. Or if you win a face-off and send Lyra Heartstrings home, when it goes into your opponent's turn, it's not going to matter whether or not she's exhausted because it's not like you're on a problem anyway. So you exhaust this, your opponent is guaranteed to draw at least 1 card during their turn because they have to at the beginning of their turn, and you get some nice little hand advantage. This card also combos with a little Troublemaker that we're going to be looking at soon. And oh boy, does it combo! Let's get this party started. It's still the best draw event in the game. It's not something you're going to find anywhere else. 1 for 3 is amazing value. And this again combos with a Troublemaker we're going to be looking at soon. I am playing the pink-white color fixer. I am very paranoid about meeting those high color requirements. Most of the cards that I'm running need 4, 5-ish power. And I'm very paranoid about hitting those numbers. I justify running 3 copies of the card because I'm also running Poetry Slam, which is a showdown card, and so the +2 power actually helps during the showdown cards, so I can play this and then play a showdown card and feel good about myself. Last cards we'll be looking at in the main deck are the Troublemaker cards. So I know everybody's going to be looking at Yellow Pear Sprite like, oh man, Kudou just runs Yellow Pear Sprite and everything. He doesn't even know what else to run. He just runs Yellow Pear Sprite because he thinks it needs to be in like every single deck. That's not necessarily true anymore. I don't think Yellow Pear Sprite is the staple that it used to be, but I do think that it has some decks that it shines in, and this is one of them. This is a pure control deck. You are taking control of your opponent's good friends and discarding everything else. The main thing that I love about Yellow Pear Sprite, and I still think is really broken about the card, is the fact that your opponent discards a card at random. So if your opponent happens to dismiss like a friend, then them dismissing that friend is the same as if it were in play and you had to play a card to dismiss it, which would normally cost you more. Playing a Troublemaker is always just one action point. It flips. Every single turn, your opponent has to get rid of a friend in their hand, or an event in their hand, or a resource in their hand, or something in their hand that would have helped them better their situation. If you are making it so your opponent can never truly beat this Troublemaker, then it's getting rid of one extra card every single turn, and your opponent's hand size is never increasing. Your opponent draws one card at the beginning of their turn, Troublemaker phase, they get rid of one card in their hand, and their hand size just never increases, and they can get rid of some pretty darn good stuff. It's pressure. It's a lot of pressure, especially when you're fighting a control deck. On top of that, we're also running 2 copies of Pinkie Pie Grump. Pinkie Pie Grump is, in my opinion, probably one of the strongest troublemakers out right now because it's just so easy to manipulate. It starts out at 3 power and it's got 2 points, so if your opponent beats this quickly enough, then obviously this isn't that great of a card, but if you play it correctly, this card is a total beast. Think about it. Every single time you or your opponent begin a turn, you draw a card. So this gets +1 counter at least once every single turn. If you play cards let you draw cards, like if you have Lyra Heartstrings and you exhaust it, your opponent draws 1 card, that's 1 counter. You draw 2 cards, that's 2 more counters. That was a total of 3 counters. If you play Let's Get This Party Started, immediate 3 counters. If you decide you want this to be stronger for no reason at all, you can pay a bunch of action points to draw a bunch of cards during your turn, and this gets equal power to the amount of cards that you just drew. This card would be a bit more balanced if it were like until the end of turn, like this card gets +1 power until the end of turn for each card drawn, but it's not. It's a permanent +1 counter, and that makes it amazing. If you're controlling your opponent's field so they can't beat this early enough, then this will get up to like 7, 8, 9, 10-ish power, and your opponent will just never be able to beat it, because even if they would normally be able to beat like 7, 8, 9-ish power, they just can't do it if you're controlling their friends off, and this is constantly getting stronger, okay? You have this thing at like 20 power, and it's just your opponent can't solve that problem anymore. It's just gone. Getting onto problems, we're going to start with Deep Dark Forest. Deep Dark Forest is a pretty good starting problem because your opponent can't play Troublemakers here. So if your opponent is playing some kind of Troublemaker control or something that has a lot of Troublemaker play in it, this shuts them down long enough for you to start getting your combos off. Mean Meanie Pants mainly to fill space, and also when this problem is played, each player draws a card. LOL, that Pinkie Pie just got +2 counters. Effing awesome. Maybes are for babies because 1, it's got a bonus of 3, so I can pretty much just win with it with Rarity Auto Win. It takes my opponent 9 to solve it, which, if I'm controlling their field properly, will take them a very long time. It only takes 4 pink, 3 white. The 3 white can be filled by Chrysalis, and the 4 pink can be filled by pretty much everything else. And better yet, when a player confronts this problem, that player may draw a card. So you increase your hand advantage, your opponent can never solve it, and Pinkie Pie is getting super duper big. Balloon Party Gone Wrong is kind of the same thing. It's only got a bonus of 2, which kind of sucks because you want those bonuses of 3 for rarity, but it has 8 for your opponent to solve it, and it also has the effect where if your opponent's main character is boosted, which most decks are going to try to boost their main characters as quickly as possible, it needs +3 to confront this card's problem. So if your opponent is boosted, then it pretty much null and voids your opponent's character being boosted, which I think is hilarious, because now they need 11 to solve this, and now having that character boosted is actually kind of hurting them. Also, I feel like an idiot for not realizing this before, but this looks kind of like the picture from the very first promotional playmat. Huh. Cheering Up a Friend was pretty much made for this kind of deck. If you're taking half of your opponent's friends and you are discarding the rest, making your opponent get at least 4 characters here is going to be lolsy, because even if you take into account that they can just move their main character here, they have to keep 3 friends in play, and it's only got a bonus of 2. Like, most people are going to look at the 4 and they're going to be like, oh, well, you know, like, it only takes your opponent 4 to solve this, so, like, why is it so good? Well, that's the reason it's so good. making your opponent keep 4 characters in play at this problem. And oh my god, it's just so good because you're taking control of their friends, so you're going to have more friends, they're going to have less friends, and it takes them a while just to get enough friends to solve this. Fire When Ready is going to shock a lot of people, but somebody brought up a really good point in one of my older videos that this card actually kind of fills an interesting niche. If there are only 8 problems that you really kind of want to run, you can run Fire When Ready and it lets you cycle to those problems even better. Plus, it replaces your opponent's problem, so if they happen to get the bonus on their turn, you can flip it and then you have a chance to get the bonus on your turn because it's a fresh problem being played. So I'm running it for that utility only. It's a really good space filler, and it lets me get to some bonus points that I wouldn't be able to normally. No, there's no way in this deck that you can solve it. It's only so that you can cycle. Okay, that's pretty much it for my Chrysalis deck. If you have any thoughts on the deck, please leave them in the comments section below. Those things are really awesome to read. Please leave me a like, those things help us out a whole bunches. And if you found this video by accident, then subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. I have everything ready for the Frighten control deck and another kind of surprise deck that I want to show everybody, so stay tuned. In fact, who knows, the Frighten deck might actually be up the same day that this is up. If not, it'll be up the next day. See you then!